Lancelot Johnston was single and 20 years old when he moved from North Carolina to Madison, Georgia in 1810. He planned to acquire land and become a planter, and like many, he brought with him considerable capital, plus European values and social behaviors. Johnston purchased over 3,000 acres of fertile land in Georgia and Alabama, and on this land he grew cotton. By the late 1820s, cotton had made Johnston a very wealthy man. As an experiment, Johnston mixed cottonseed oil with white lead. This resulted in a pure shade of white with which he painted his entire house, including the roof. One witness to history said, "One could see the house from a mile away." Johnston named this in-town plantation home Snow Hill. It stood less than a half-mile from the center of Madison. The local newspaper described it in 1842. Immediately adjacent to our town is a most beautiful and tastefully laid out garden, planted with a great variety of shrubbery and flowers, many of which are very rare and curious. It also contains a pool some 50 feet in circumference and 4 deep, which is well stocked with the Finney tribe. This garden is the property of Lancelot Johnston, Esquire, to whose liberality and public spirit our citizens and strangers are indebted for the privilege they enjoy of visiting it at pleasure. Snow Hill was very casual, with winding paths, green lawns, large trees, plants and flowers, and water features. Amongst the greenery were chairs and benches tucked into quiet corners, similar to the gardens of Monet, a park meant to be enjoyed. Another local resident with similar credentials was Wilds Cobb, whose house Boxwood remains a Madison landmark. The parterre gardens, as seen in great English country houses and French castles, were carefully planned by a landscape architect in the 1850s. This drawing of the plan has been published in many books about southern garden landscapes. In 2012, then owner Floyd Newton Jr. stated that the gardens at Boxwood looked much different by the later 1800s. Boxwood was fenced in completely. There was a large barn for animals near the old post road side of the yard, and a huge vegetable garden where the rose beds had been. All along the south side of the house, fruit trees and berry and grapevines grew. Its parterres were the focus, laid out in beautiful patterns with fruit trees and vegetables planted in rows. This property was formal, as seen in great English country houses and French castles, and best seen privately by family and guests from the upstairs windows. Lancelot Johnston and Wilds Cobb were not alone. One early historian described Madison by saying, "There are many well-educated gentlemen and ladies in Madison. Many of the citizens are wealthy and live in much style. The ladies are remarkably pretty, and many of them highly accomplished. In point of intelligence, refinement, and hospitality, this town acknowledges no superior." And their gardens reflected this. Many of the first settlers in Madison came from Virginia and North Carolina. Their families had been in this country for generations. They were educated and well-traveled, and had every intention of leading a similar life in Madison. The men built luxurious homes in town, specifically for the women and children, while they traveled back and forth to a plantation home near the cotton fields. Dressing the in-town plantation homes was a source of pride for the private enjoyment of the family and close friends, but the gardens became a public display for all to see and enjoy. On Main Street in Madison, trees, bushes, flowers, vegetable and flower gardens were in clear view. It became the promenade walk for residents and visitors alike. A beautifully designed yard or garden inspired others to match colors and quality. Like-minded people came together to discuss all the elements in the garden. They exchanged tree seedlings, shrub cuttings, and flower and vegetable bulbs and seeds. And for the most dedicated gardeners, a workspace was needed, specifically to propagate seeds, hold over plants for the winter, and extend the growing season into the fall and winter, a space where vegetables could be grown all year round. How was this accomplished? The answer initially was a pit garden, popular in America in the 1800s. It was simply a pit dug 1 to 4 feet deep, covered with glass doors or fabric. But many accidents occurred with this low-to-the-ground design. Newspaper stories of the day told of pits filling with water during a storm. Hailstones broke the glass. Animals and people fell into them, often breaking bones and suffering cuts from the glass. Newspapers documented small children falling into pit gardens and being drowned. By the end of the 19th century, the more practical pit house joined pit gardens. In simple terms, pit houses were greenhouse structures built over a pit which would extend the growing season. An environmentally sustainable structure with the subterranean soil keeping plants warm in winter and cooler in the summer. These structures allowed a homeowner to plant seeds in the winter to get a head start in the spring garden. It allowed flowers and exotic and tropical plants to be wintered over. It also provided a space for storage of pots and tools. 8 of these sweet and unique little historic buildings are on our tour of Main Street in Madison. 6 still stand. 2 others are lost to time. Charles and Kitty Reed Fitzpatrick built this house at 605 South Main Street in Madison in 1900. Today, the home is owned by Jamie and John Miles. Their brick pit house is highly representative of those on our tour. It is located just south of the main house and was most likely built at the same time. Both face Main Street. Its dimensions are about 8.5 feet wide and 11 feet long, and the center roof peak is about 6.5 feet from ground level. The interior was filled with sunlight from 3 windows on each side and a roof that originally was more than likely glass. The pit is 32 inches deep, as are half of those on our tour. This pit has a dirt floor, which is also a common feature. The original owner of this house was a woman named Walter Jarboe. Not long after she was widowed in 1904, Walter, her 2 daughters, and mother-in-law moved from out in the country to Madison, where she built this house in 1906. It was the first house in Madison to have running water. Today it is owned by Chance Bridges and Kendall Newberry. The pit house was also built in 1906 and is on the north side of the main house, both facing Main Street. Its pit is 32 inches deep with a dirt floor, and while this pit house has no side windows, plentiful sunlight came in through the roof glass. 2 inset panels in the center of the standing seam metal roof. The glass was replaced later by corrugated fiberglass. Added light came through the 1 window in the door. New owner Chance Bridges was happy to learn the history of the little building and, laughing, said, "I wondered why my tool shed had such a deep hole in the floor." His brick pit house is about 8.5 feet wide and 14.5 feet long. The peak of the roof is nearly 8 feet tall. Its pit is 32 inches deep with a dirt floor. Dr. Gazaway B. Knight built this house at 548 South Main Street in 1848. During the Civil War, he was commander of the Panola Guards, a military unit organized in Madison. He was married to the daughter of United States Senator Joshua Hill. The owners of the property today are Robert and Elaine Jackson. Their large brick pit house is the only one on our Main Street tour which is located behind its main house. Both face Main Street. At 11.5 feet wide and 17 feet long, it stands 9 feet at the roof peak. The pit is 22 inches deep with a dirt floor. This pit house has no windows, but the roof originally was glass, now corrugated fiberglass. The door is solid. Dave and Elizabeth Minix now own the renowned house and property at 498 South Main Street. In 1883, Legree Hill Foster built his home, the most elegant country home in Middle Georgia, directly on the foundation remnants of the old Georgia Female College, which was destroyed by fire the year before. It was graced by a dense shade of large oaks in the front. Foster's substantial pit garden no longer exists, but in 1987, an archaeological excavation by Marshall Woody Williams found evidence of a subterranean greenhouse on the north side of the present house, describing a brick-walled structure with brick floor, some 4 feet deep into the ground, and of 12-foot width and 15-foot length. From all appearances, this was built about 1883, at the time of the house. The pit house brick had been salvaged from the old college building. Quite distinctive, each brick measures exactly 4 inches by 8 inches. Around 1910, the pit was filled in. Interestingly, the fill included whiskey bottles and many glass jars, possibly used for propagating roses and other cuttings. The striking house at 394 North Main Street was built in 1853 by dressmaker Miss Elizabeth D. Van Landingham. The owner today is Carol Winslow. This petite brick pit house is located just to the south side of the main house and faces the backyard. At 7.5 feet wide and 9 feet 9 inches long, it is the smallest on our tour. It stands 5 feet 8 inches high, and its pit is 32 inches deep. It too has a dirt floor. Originally full of sunlight, it has 5 large windows, 2 on each side and 1 at the back. Its roof is composed of narrow pressed metal panels at the front and back, and large corrugated fiberglass panels across the center, which originally would have been glass. Ruth and Mike Bracewell have owned and lived at 611 North Main Street since 1976. Their house was built in 1853 by Nathan Massey while he was a trustee of the Georgia Female College. This little gem of a pit house is made of brick and sits next to a later era children's playhouse on the southern side of the main house. All 3 structures face Main Street. It is 9.5 feet wide and nearly 8 feet long. The sloping roof is 6 feet above ground in the front and 4 feet above in the back. The front door is solid with no window. The pit is 4 feet deep lined with stuccoed brick and requires a ladder or steps to enter. The concrete floor has a raised concrete square in the middle. Sunlight entered through one double-hung window on each side of the door and a small window in the back wall at ground level, and most abundantly through a roof of glass, now replaced with corrugated fiberglass. With shelves attached all round and at several levels, every inch of the interior space was designed for plants to catch the slanting sunlight from fall to spring. The first owner of the house at 651 North Main Street, built in 1853, was Joel A. Billups, a respected Madison lawyer. The owners today are Michael and Bromley Krackemeyer. This brick pit house is the largest on our tour and is located on the south side of the main house, both facing Main Street. A unique feature here is the entrance. Outside steps lead down to its door, which is at pit level, 32 inches below ground. The brick and stucco structure measures 17 feet 8 inches wide and 12 feet 9 inches long. The roof peak is 6 feet above ground. Its only window is in the door. Its roof was originally glass, replaced later with corrugated fiberglass. The Edwardian Cottage at 668 North Main Street was built around 1917 by J. Holm Morgan for his newly married daughter. Current owners are Chad and Kelly McLeod. Sadly, previous owners removed and filled in the final pit house on our tour. But June D. Harrell recorded it with photographs and details in her 1997 survey of local pit houses. The little building stood very close to the south side of the main house and faced the house. It was 9.5 feet wide and 10.5 feet long and had a solid door. The pit was 6 inches deep and had a gravel floor. The sloping roof was 9 feet high in the rear and 7.5 feet in the front. This pit house had 5 windows on 3 sides, with a corrugated fiberglass roof that originally would have been glass. By the late 1800s, Madison's women became part of the women's club movement that swept the United States. No longer were women willing to just stay home and tend to wifely duties. Women's literary clubs, sewing clubs, and card clubs were created, not as copies or auxiliaries of men's groups, but as a space for women to share ideas as equals. In 1891, 12 women friends who shared plants and plant cuttings in Athens, Georgia, formed the Ladies' Garden Club of Athens, the first garden club in America. Less than 2 years later, the first garden club in Madison, the Madison Garden Club, was formed. The Madison Garden Club was one of the earliest garden clubs in the United States, possibly the second in the nation. Garden clubs developed beyond the improvement of members' private gardens to taking interest in civic beautification and planting trees and flower gardens in public spaces. In 1932, when La Flora Garden Club formed in Madison, 3 of their goals were highway beautification, beautification of filling stations, and elimination of unsightly signs. We salute the men and women who have been members of Madison's garden clubs for nearly 130 years. their initial focus being a love of gardening and passion to learn and trade knowledge within a social group. Later, they felt a larger calling, preserving historic landscapes and gardens for future generations. Madison Garden Club, the very first garden club in Morgan County and possibly the second in Georgia. La Flora Garden Club, in 1950 organized the first Madison Tours of Homes. Boxwood Garden Club, the first garden club to include men as members. Magnolia Garden Club, the garden club with the longest continuous service to the community. Three Seasons Garden Club, known for their Yard of the Month recognitions. Madison Ladies Garden Club financially supports the vast vegetable garden at Camp Twin Lakes. Antebellum Garden Club promotes pass-along plant exchanges with members and friends. Rutledge Garden Club, known for beautifying downtown Rutledge. The garden clubs of Morgan County still take pride in beautifying our public spaces and at the same time hearkening back to the original reasons of being part of a garden club, simply enjoying friendships and discussing the joys of gardening.